The encounter. The battlefield was quiet after the storm of war. Only smoke and the faint smell of ash filled the air, and broken armor pieces scattered across the ground. The human soldier named Kale opened his eyes slowly, his body heavy and his mind filled with the memory of endless fighting. He had fought against machines, beasts, and other humans, but this place did not look like the ruins of Earth or any battlefield he had ever known. Instead, the ground was black stone glowing with faint red cracks, and the sky shimmered as if covered in burning shadows. He tried to stand and his legs trembled, yet something unseen pulled him forward. Before he could resist, a rift of light opened in front of him, stretching tall like a door carved into the very fabric of reality. A cold wind rushed out and voices whispered in a language that carried both promise and threat. The soldier clenched his fists, ready for another fight, though he had no weapon left but his will. The rift swallowed him and darkness fell. When his eyes opened again, he stood inside a vast throne room unlike anything he had ever imagined. Black marble stretched across the floor, polished so smooth it reflected his own tired face. Pillars carved with twisting shapes of demons rose higher than any human tower, and fires burned in silver braziers without smoke. At the far end sat a throne carved from obsidian, jagged yet majestic, and on that throne rested a figure that silenced the air itself. The demon goddess, Her. Beauty was terrifying, her form tall and perfect, her eyes glowing with a crimson light that seemed to pierce into his very soul. Her hair flowed like liquid night, her lips curved in a smile that promised power and punishment in equal measure. Around her stood generals with horns, wings, and claws, each armored in black steel, but none dared speak. The goddess leaned forward, and her voice echoed with a sweetness that carried command. I will grant you 3 wishes, human. You may ask for riches, armies, or immortality. Whatever your heart desires will be yours. Kale stared at her, his body still weak but his mind steady. He thought of the battles he had fought, of the soldiers who had fallen beside him, of the families who would never see their loved ones again. He thought of greed and how it had torn empires apart. He thought of power and how it had crushed the innocent. The goddess waited, expecting him to beg like the others she had broken before. Her servants leaned closer, whispering that a human could only ask for selfish things. But Kale opened his mouth and spoke calmly. I wish that you would smile not as a goddess, but as a woman. The throne room froze. The generals exchanged stunned looks, their claws twitching as if they had misheard. The fires in the braziers flickered and the air grew heavy. The goddess herself blinked as if struck by a weapon. Her crimson glow dimmed slightly and her lips parted, not with command but with silence. For the first time in centuries, she did not know how to answer. Her cheeks warmed, and though her beauty was immortal, she felt a rush of embarrassment that no demon had ever caused. She shifted in her throne and looked down at this single tired soldier who dared to speak to her, as if she were not a goddess of fear, but simply someone who had forgotten what it meant to feel. Her generals growled low, confused and angry. One whispered to another that the human mocked their queen. Another raised a blade, ready to strike. But the goddess raised her hand and the room fell silent. She studied Kale, her eyes narrowing, yet not with rage, but with something unfamiliar. He could see it in the way her lips trembled, in the way her shoulders softened. He had reached something deeper inside. Hershey asked him, why would you waste a wish on something so small, so foolish, when you could have demanded glory, power, or even life eternal? Why choose this? Kale lifted his head and answered, because power means nothing without meaning, and meaning comes when someone can still smile without masks and without chains. The generals hissed furious at his words, but the goddess leaned back, her blush still faint upon her cheeks. Her heart, something she had buried under centuries of conquest, stirred. Against her will, she granted his wish not with words but with a smile, soft, fragile, and real. The air in the throne room shifted, and the demons did not know whether to fall to their knees in awe or tremble in fear. And in that moment, the demon goddess realized this human was not like the others, the blushing goddess. The throne room remained silent after the moment that had unsettled the entire underworld. The demon goddess had granted thousands of requests in her long reign, and each time, Mortals and demons alike begged for blood armies, riches, or the destruction of their enemies, but never had anyone asked her to smile, not in all her immortal life. The simple request cut through her like a blade far sharper than any forged by her blacksmiths. For the first time in countless years, her face burned with color, and the crimson glow in her eyes flickered as though she had lost control of her own power. The generals surrounding her throne shifted uneasily. Some snarled under their breath. Others whispered in tones sharp as daggers. They could not understand why their mistress had not struck the human down for his insolence. For them, her blush was a weakness, an opening they had never imagined could exist. One massive horned demon leaned toward another, his voice low yet filled with contempt. He has bewitched her with mortal tricks. The goddess must not allow this, yet none dared step forward without her command. Kale stood alone at the center of the chamber, his body still aching from the battlefield he had left behind, but his spirit unbroken. His wish had been fulfilled, though not in the way most would have measured it. He had seen the smile she tried to hide, soft and human and vulnerable. For him, that was worth more than crowns or cities. His gaze never faltered, even as countless glowing eyes watched him with hate. The silence dragged on heavy like a storm waiting to break until the goddess spoke again. Her voice was softer than before, her tone lacking the thunder it usually carried. "Tell me, human, do you mock me? Do you think I am nothing more than a woman to entertain your foolish heart?" Kyle lifted his chin, his voice steady. "I do not mock you. I see you not as a goddess, but as someone who has carried the weight of eternity, and forgotten that even eternity has need of warmth. If I am foolish for reminding you, then I accept it." Her eyes widened, and the generals gasped. Some struck their weapons against the floor, demanding his execution, but she raised her hand, and the sound died instantly. Her stare lingered on him, and in that gaze a battle raged within her. Pride warred with curiosity. Her cruelty clashed with something far older and buried. The goddess leaned back upon her obsidian throne, her long fingers gripping the armrests. Her lips curled into the faintest smile, though her voice tried to remain sharp. "You are bold, human, yet you have 2 wishes remaining. Choose them wisely, for my patience is not endless." But Kyle did not speak right away. Instead, he held, her gaze unshaken as if daring her to break the silence again. The demons muttered that he was reckless, that no mortal could survive such insolence, yet they too could not ignore the tremor in their queen's voice. The fires in the silver braziers crackled, louder shadows dancing across the black walls as the atmosphere grew heavier. Still Kyle stood calm. His first wish had unsettled her, and he knew that her blush had changed more than just her expression. He had shifted something in her soul, and though he could not yet see where it would lead, he sensed that this meeting was far larger than himself. The goddess finally asked again, "Why waste such power when the world bends at my command? Do you not hunger for revenge, for dominion, for the chance to rise above all that held you down?" Kale answered quietly. Yet his words carried across the vast hall. "I have seen revenge destroy good men. I have seen dominion turn rulers into monsters, and I have seen power rip apart families. I do not hunger for what ruins lives, I hunger for what makes them whole." The court erupted into chaos. Demons shouted curses, their voices echoing like thunder through the chamber. But the goddess sat still, her eyes fixed on the human soldier, as if she could not turn away from him. Her blush deepened, though she tried to hide it behind the mask of her usual authority. For centuries, she had conquered empires, crushed gods, and enslaved mortals, with only a glance. Yet this man had no army, no weapon, no chains of magic to resist her. He only had his words, and somehow they pierced through her immortality more effectively than any blade. She hated it, and yet she could not deny the strange stirring in her chest. The generals bowed low, begging her to let them end the insolent creature, but she dismissed them with a single motion of her hand. Her authority was absolute, and even in their fury, none dared defy her. The human had shaken the throne of the Underworld with nothing but honesty, She realized that if she destroyed him now, his words would remain echoing in her mind forever, haunting her like a curse. She leaned forward again, her voice low enough that only he could truly feel the weight of it. Two wishes remain: human. Will you continue this path, or will you claim something greater? Kale's face was calm, his eyes unwavering, and though he said nothing more in that moment, the tension grew until even the fires seemed to bend toward him. The throne room no longer felt like a place of absolute demon power. Instead, it felt like the center of a storm brewing from the heart of one mortal who refused to bow. The price of curiosity. The demon goddess sat in silence upon her throne, her crimson eyes locked on the lone human before her. Her generals shifted nervously behind her, torn between their fear of her authority and their hatred of this mortal who had spoken with such boldness. No one in the underworld had ever dared to look at her the way he did, without trembling, without begging, without falling to their knees. Yet here was Kyle standing tall, though weary from battle, and though stripped of weapons, his words carried a weight that none of their blades could match. Her thoughts twisted in confusion. She had ruled for countless centuries, and every wish she granted had ended in despair or corruption, for those who asked mortals always revealed their hunger for power, or their greed for wealth. Demons always demanded blood or dominion. But this man had asked for her smile, and when she challenged him, he had answered with truth so steady that her heart betrayed her with a rush of warmth. She despised the feeling, and yet she could not let it go. It was as if this mortal had found a hidden crack in the armor she had forged around her soul. The court of demons murmured louder until the sound echoed across the marble pillars. Some demanded that she strip the human of his tongue. Others cried for him to be burned alive. They believed their goddess had been insulted, but she raised her hand once, more, and silence fell instantly. Her command was law, but in that silence her mind struggled. What did it mean that one mortal soldier made her feel so unsure? Kyle felt the pressure in the chamber, but he did not falter. He understood now that he had reached her in a way none had before. He had seen the faintest blush on her face, and he knew it was not weakness, but truth, hiding behind centuries of cruelty. He took a breath and finally spoke, his voice carrying steady across the vast hall. Ask me why I do not hunger for power or revenge, and I tell you this. I have walked through war, and I have seen it consume everything. I have fought beside men who lost themselves chasing dominion, and I have watched families fall apart when greed ruled their hearts. If you are as eternal as you claim, then you have seen this too. You know the emptiness it leaves. The words cut through the room like fire through dry wood. The generals hissed and snarled their wings, spreading their claws, digging into the stone floor. Yet still they did not move forward, for their queen had not given the command. The goddess leaned back, her expression unreadable, but her eyes glowed softer, as if his words stirred memories she did not wish to remember. She had seen empires crumble under her rule. She had witnessed champions who begged her for strength only to be destroyed by their own desires. And though she had always told herself it was the nature of mortals, Kale's words forced her to wonder whether she too had been a prisoner of the same hunger. She lowered her voice so that it echoed softly, yet carried across every ear in the hall. Human, you are clever, but your words are dangerous. You seek to shape my thoughts with mortal ideals. Perhaps you wish to chain me with kindness, as others have tried with chains of iron. Kale shook his head, his face calm. I seek no chains, goddess. You speak of power as if it is everything. Yet even you cannot deny that you smiled because it is rare and precious, because it is real, not because it is strong. For the first time in centuries, the goddess had no ready answer. The silence after his words felt heavier than any weapon her generals could wield. She searched his face, looking for deceit, for hidden motives. Yet she found only the scars of battle and the quiet strength of someone who had endured too much loss. The fire in her chest grew stronger, and though she wanted to strike it down, she could not. She realized then that she wanted to know more. She wanted to understand him not as an enemy, not as prey, but as something she could not define. Her generals grew restless, their anger boiling, until one finally stepped forward, a massive demon with wings that spread like black sails and a voice that thundered through the chamber. My queen, he dares to weaken you. He twists your mind with his foolish tongue. Let me cut him down before his poison spreads." The goddess rose slowly from her throne, her towering figure casting shadows across the chamber. The sight of her rising silenced every voice instantly. She stepped forward, her long gown trailing like dark fire, and stood before Kale. Her eyes glowed brighter, and her voice carried authority that could shatter stone. "You will not touch him." Generals lowered their heads, some trembling at the sharpness of her command. But within their hearts fear grew, not of Kale, but of what he was awakening in their queen. She turned back to the human, her face close enough that he could see the faint shimmer in her eyes. "Tell me, Kale, why should I not strip away your soul for daring to teach me lessons I do not need?" He held her gaze steady. "Because if you strip it away, you will lose the only chance to remember who you once were." Her breath caught, against her will. For centuries she had buried her past, her beginnings forgotten in the endless pursuit of conquest. Yet in his words, she felt the echo of something ancient, a memory of when she had not been a goddess of war, but a being who had laughed, who had known warmth, who had felt joy. A flush crossed her cheeks again, and she turned away before her court could see it. She raised her hand, dismissing them all. "Leave us." The generals protested, but her voice thundered louder. "Go." The chamber shook with her command, and one by one the demons bowed low before vanishing into the shadows until only she and Kale remained. The silence that followed was unlike before. It was not heavy with hatred, but thick with something unspoken, something dangerous. The goddess sat once more upon her throne, but her gaze never left him. Her curiosity now burned like fire. She leaned forward, her voice low and steady. "Two wishes remain human, and I must know what you will do next." For the first time in centuries, she realized that she was not the one who controlled the fate of the chamber. He was whispers of rebellion. The grand chamber of the underworld lay empty now, save for the goddess seated upon her throne, and Kale, who stood in the center. His body weary, yet his spirit firm. The flames in the silver braziers burned low, as if bowing before a storm that had not yet broken. The silence between them was no longer the silence of authority, but the silence of tension and curiosity. The goddess had dismissed her generals, yet their whispers carried through the shadows of the palace, for demons did not easily quell suspicion and fear. Outside the throne room, the generals gathered, their voices hushed, but sharp with anger. They spoke of weakness, of betrayal of a mortal who dared to touch the heart of their queen. One of them snarled that the human had planted seeds of corruption in her mind. Another claimed that if left unchecked, he would undo all that they had built over countless centuries. Their words grew louder until the corridors echoed with their fury, and for the first time in generations there was doubt among them. Doubt not of their power, but of their goddess. Inside the throne room, Kale met the goddess's gaze, steady and unbroken. Though his muscles trembled from exhaustion, he knew the demons whispered beyond the walls. He could feel the vibration of their voices like waves crashing against the stone. But he did not fear them. His only focus was her, the immortal being whose soul flickered with uncertainty. She leaned forward, her long fingers resting against the arm of her throne, her voice softer than the storm outside. "You have disturbed my court, human. You have made me question what I had buried, and I cannot decide whether I should thank you or end you." Kale spoke with calm certainty. "If my words bring you closer to what you once were, then you already know the answer." For a moment her lips parted, as though to respond, yet no words came. Instead, she turned her gaze away, her hair flowing like a river of night as she wrestled with the strange battle inside her. He had stripped away the certainty that once defined her reign, and in its place he had left questions that spread like cracks across her unshakable foundation. The generals returned to the hall uninvited, their voices rising with rebellion. Their leader, a demon with scales of iron and wings that darkened the chamber, stepped forward and struck his spear against the floor. "My queen, this cannot continue. You have allowed a mortal to twist your will. You have shown weakness before the court, and weakness spreads like fire. If you will not end him, then we will." She rose slowly from her throne, her crimson glow blazing brighter than the fires themselves. Silence fell instantly, though hatred still smoldered in the eyes of her generals. She raised her hand and pointed at them, her voice shaking the chamber. "You dare defy me?" The iron-scaled demon bowed, but did not lower his gaze. His courage came not from loyalty but from fear of change. "My queen, we are sworn to follow you, but if you falter, then all of the Underworld falters as well. This human is poison. His words make you hesitate. He makes you doubt what you are." The goddess stepped down from her throne, her steps echoing across the black marble floor. She stood between Kale and the demons, her tall frame radiating power, and for a moment it was unclear whether she would strike him down or shield him. Her generals waited breathless, ready to unleash their wrath if she wavered. Kyle felt the weight of the moment pressing upon him. He knew his second wish could decide everything, yet he also knew that once spoken it could not be taken back. He closed his eyes for a brief instant, recalling the faces of those he had lost, the families destroyed, the soldiers buried in silence. He opened them again, and spoke not with desperation but with quiet strength. "My second wish is this: free those you have enslaved, not for me but for them. Release the chains that bind the innocent." The chamber erupted in chaos. The generals roared their fury, filling the hall like thunder. They shouted that the human demanded the destruction of their empire, that without slaves their power would crumble, entire legions would vanish, their dominion shattered. They drew their weapons, their eyes burning with rage. Yet, the goddess stood still, her eyes fixed upon Kale. Her heart pounded with a conflict she had not known in centuries, for his wish struck at the very core of her rule. She had built her throne upon conquest, upon the suffering of the bound and the broken. If she granted this, she would break the order she had forged with her own hands. The iron-scaled demon raised his spear ready to strike, but her voice shattered the air with a command more absolute than any they had heard. Enough. Her aura exploded outward, filling the chamber with a force that threw the demons to their knees. Her eyes blazed not only with power, but with a storm of emotion she could not contain. She turned toward Kale, her lips trembling. "You ask for what no one has. Dared you ask me to unravel my reign? Why do you push me toward ruin?" Kale's voice did not falter. "Because chains do not make you strong, they make you hollow. You are feared. Yes, but fear is not respect. Fear is not love. You are powerful, but even power grows empty when built on the suffering of the weak." His words cut through her once more, and she felt the blush rise unbidden on her immortal face. The generals behind her hissed with venom, whispering rebellion into the shadows. But she ignored them. She stood before Kale, her expression torn between wrath and awe. The wish had been spoken, and it could not be undone. She knew she would grant it, though it would tear through the foundations of her dominion. She knew as well that her court would never forgive this mortal for pushing her to such a decision. The whispers of rebellion were no longer whispers. They were the first cracks of a storm rising within the underworld, and in that storm, the human soldier stood unyielding, a single figure, against an empire of demons, the second wish fulfilled. The underworld trembled as the weight of Kale's second wish settled over the throne room. The goddess stood silent upon the black marble floor, her eyes glowing with a conflict that shook even her immortal being. She had heard countless wishes through centuries of reign, yet none had demanded such sacrifice. To free the enslaved souls that fueled her empire was to undo the very chains that kept her dominion unchallenged. The demons knelt before her in fear, not from respect but from the surge of power that rippled from her indecision. Their whispers, however, carried rebellion, for they knew that if she granted the wish, everything they had built upon cruelty would shatter. Kale remained, standing in the center, his back straight. Though exhaustion pulled on every muscle, he had spoken without hesitation, and now he waited. His eyes never left her, and his voice, when it came, was steady. "I do not ask for ruin. I ask for justice. You know, deep within, that chains cannot last forever. If you deny this now, your empire will fall one day by its own weight. Better that you break those chains with your own hand than let them drag you into darkness even deeper than this realm." Her crimson eyes flickered as if fire and shadow battled within them. Memories surged against her will. She remembered mortals begging for freedom centuries ago. She remembered the broken faces of those bound to her service. She remembered her own laughter when she crushed their pleas. Yet now those same memories no longer felt like triumph but heavy stones pressing against her chest. For the first time she questioned whether her throne was carved from strength or from endless fear. The generals could not remain still. Their leader rose with wings spread wide, his voice thundering across the hall. "My queen, this mortal corrupts you. If you grant his wish, you break the pact of power forged in blood. Our dominion will crumble, and the courts of the upper worlds will strike while we are weak. Strike him down and restore the fear that binds all souls to your will." The goddess turned slowly toward her generals, her voice like a whip of thunder. "You think me so fragile that a mortal's words can undo me. You think my throne rests upon fear alone." The chamber quaked as her aura expanded, crashing down upon the demons and forcing them to bow lower. Their wings folded and their claws dug into the stone. Yet even in their submission, rebellion glimmered. In their eyes they feared not her strength but her change. She turned back to Kyle, her gaze sharp yet trembling with unspoken emotions. "Very well, human. If this is your wish, then so it shall be." The fires roared brighter as her hands lifted the air, splitting with ancient power. Her voice carried through the underworld, unbound and absolute. "By my command, every chain forged in my name shall break, every soul bound in my dominion shall be free." A scream rose, not of agony but of release throughout. The underworld chains shattered in an endless storm. Metal bonds dissolved into nothingness. Collars fell from necks. Shackles broke from wrists and ankles. The wails of despair turned into cries of disbelief and joy as countless souls found themselves unbound for the first time in centuries. The walls of the palace shook with the power of freedom rushing like a tidal wave, and the very foundation of the demon empire quivered under the strain. Kyle closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the wave of release as though it passed through his own heart. He could almost hear the voices of the freed echoing in the distance. The goddess, however, stood still, her face pale from the enormity of what she had done. Her power had been great, but she had never felt such loss of control, as if part of her essence had been torn away. Yet within that weakness there was something else. A strange light glimmered in her chest, something she had not felt in longer than she could remember. Her generals, however, rose in fury. Their wings spread, their eyes blazing with hatred. One by one they shouted their defiance. They called her traitor. They called her broken. They declared that the underworld would not bow to weakness. Their voices became a storm of rebellion, and soon their weapons glowed with fire as they prepared to strike. They no longer bowed to their queen, for they saw her choice as betrayal. Kyle stepped forward. Though he had no weapon, his voice carried strong across the chaos. "She has freed you, not with fear but with choice. You may call her weak, but it takes greater strength to shatter the chains of her own making than to cling to them forever." The demons snarled, but even among them his words struck something. Some wavered their claws, trembling as though a seed of doubt had been planted within their rage. The goddess turned her gaze to Kale, and for the second time, her cheeks flushed with color. "You speak as though you know me better than I know myself." Her voice wavered between awe and disbelief. "And still you stand, though the entire underworld calls for your end." Why, she stepped closer, her presence wrapping around him like heat from a fire. Because Kyle answered softly, "You needed someone to remind you that even gods can change." The throne room crackled with tension as freed souls cried in the distance and rebellious generals gathered their strength. The empire of the underworld had shifted in a single moment, and nothing could return it to what it once was. The demon goddess stood torn between pride and awakening, and in her heart she began to fear not her enemies, not even rebellion, but the human who had forced her to feel once more. And so the underworld trembled not from her wrath, but from the second wish of a mortal soldier whose voice carried the weight of truth. The final choice. The air in the throne room was thick with tension. The freed souls outside cried with voices that echoed across the black stone of the underworld, their jubilation rising, like a storm, while inside rebellion brewed like fire ready to ignite. The generals no longer looked upon their queen with reverence. Instead, their eyes burned with suspicion and hate. They saw the chains of power broken, they saw their dominion fractured. And in their eyes, this human was the cause. Yet Kale did not flinch. He stood in the center of it all, tired but unbroken, his heart carrying more weight than any blade could bear. The demon goddess remained upon her throne, her body still trembling from the surge of power she had unleashed when she granted his second wish. She felt emptiness where once there had been certainty, but she also felt something she could not name, a strange warmth that made her immortal soul shiver. She had ruled for ages with cruelty, but now she had undone it with one command because one human asked it of her. Her generals whispered of treason among themselves, their wings shifting, their hands gripping their weapons. She could hear the rebellion in their breaths, and she knew that if she faltered for even a moment, the palace would drown in blood. Her crimson eyes locked on Kyle, who stood silent as if waiting for her to speak. His expression was calm yet resolute, and she found herself both enraged and drawn to him. He had taken control of the very ground she ruled without lifting a weapon. His strength was not of the body but of the spirit, and against that she felt more vulnerable than she had against any army. She leaned forward, her voice a whisper yet sharp enough to cut through the storm outside. 2 wishes are gone, human, and still you stand. Tell me what your final desire is before my generals strike you down. Do you seek power? Do you seek glory? Do you seek your own salvation? Kyle shook his head slowly, and for a moment he did not speak. The silence spread heavy like smoke until finally he said, I will not speak my last wish until I see what choice you make, because this is not only about what I want, it is about what you want. The hall grew colder at his words. The generals hissed their fury and demanded his death. One shouted that the human mocked their queen. Another roared that hesitation was weakness and that they must seize the throne themselves. Yet she raised her hand and they fell silent, though their rage burned still. She studied him with eyes that glowed not with anger, but with something deeper. Why do you refuse power when I have placed it before you? You could have asked for armies. You could have asked for eternity. Instead, you wait. Kale stepped forward slowly, though the demons tensed with claws ready. He spoke with steady conviction, because true strength is not in what you take, but in what you choose to give. You have the power to end me now, yet you hesitate because you know that I am not wrong. You freed those who were bound, not because of me, but because of yourself. You remembered what it meant to be more than fear and chains, and now you are afraid not of me, but of the truth within you. Her chest tightened with emotions she could not control. She turned her gaze away, her hair cascading like night to hide the faint blush on her face. For centuries, she had believed herself unshakable, a goddess beyond temptation or weakness. Yet this soldier had stripped away her pride piece by piece, and in its place he had left something she had thought lost forever. Her generals, however, would not wait forever. Their leader with iron scales rose, his voice thundering through the hall. My queen, if you will not kill him, then we will. We will not bow to weakness. We will not allow a mortal to sit above us. The demons shouted their agreement, the sound rising like thunder until the walls trembled. The goddess rose from her throne, her aura exploding outward, and the chamber shook, as if the underworld itself feared her wrath. Silence fell once more, but in their eyes, rebellion still flickered. They would not remain loyal if she continued to change. She looked down upon Kale, her voice low with both command and doubt. Speak your last wish now. Human before blood fills this chamber. Kyle looked around him at the demons ready to strike at the freed souls, who cried outside at the goddess herself, torn between pride and awakening. He saw the weight pressing upon her, the burden of centuries and the fire of rebellion. He understood then that his final wish would decide not only his fate, but hers and, perhaps, the fate of the underworld itself. He stepped forward, his voice carrying clear and unwavering, I will speak my last wish, but only when the time is right. Until then I will stand here and trust that you will choose not as a goddess, but as who you truly are. The generals growled with rage, yet none dared move, for the aura of their queen held them still. The goddess stared at him, Her heart caught between fury and something she refused to name. The fires flickered. Shadows danced across the marble floor, and for the first time in her eternal reign, she did not know what the next moment would bring. The underworld stood on the edge of chaos, and all waited for the final wish of a single human soldier. The last wish. The throne room of the underworld stood at the edge of collapse. The air burned with the heat of rebellion as the freed souls outside wailed with joy, and the generals inside seethed with fury. Their loyalty cracked like glass ready to shatter, and all that held them still was the presence of their goddess, whose aura still thundered through the black marble halls. Yet even her authority trembled under the weight of what had been undone by two simple wishes. Her eyes glowed crimson, but within them swirled confusion, anger, and something far more dangerous than either curiosity. Kale stood at the center of it all, weary but unbroken. His scars from the battlefield ached, his body longed to rest, yet his spirit refused to yield. He had made two wishes that had already changed the underworld beyond recognition. Now he carried the final one within him, and he knew the moment he spoke, it would carve destiny itself. The generals hissed behind their fangs, demanding his death. Their leader, the iron-scaled demon, stepped forward, his voice booming. "My queen, the time is ended. He has poisoned your reign long enough. Give us the command, and we will tear him apart and scatter his soul across the void." The goddess raised her hand, and silence fell. The demons trembled under the force of her command, yet even she felt the strain of holding them back. Her heart thundered with a rhythm she could not master. She turned her gaze upon Kale, her voice sharp, yet trembling with unspoken emotion. "Speak your final wish, mortal, or your silence will cost you everything." Kale looked at her not with fear but with steady calm. He could see the war raging in her, the mask of a goddess trying to hold against the stirrings of something long buried. He stepped closer, his voice carrying across the vast chamber. "My last wish is not for me but for you." The demons roared in outrage, but she silenced them with a glare. Her lips parted, yet no words came as she stared at him with eyes wide in disbelief. Kale did not falter. His words flowed. "With the weight of truth, I wish that you would no longer be bound by the throne or by the chains of fear you have wrapped around yourself. I wish for you to be free, not as a goddess feared by all, but as someone who can choose her own path." The chamber froze. The fires dimmed, the whispers died, and even the freed souls outside seemed to fall silent. The demon goddess stood motionless, her immortal form trembling under the weight of the wish. No one in all her centuries of conquest had ever asked for her freedom. No one had ever considered that she too might be bound by the very dominion she ruled. She had worn her crown like armor. She had sat upon her throne like a prisoner, and she had forgotten what it meant to live beyond fear and power. Now this mortal had spoken words that tore through every wall she had built around her heart. Her generals screamed betrayal. They shouted that she would abandon them, that without her rule, the underworld would collapse into chaos. They raised their weapons ready to strike down both her and the human. Yet before they could act, her aura erupted brighter than ever before. The flames in the braziers exploded. The marble floor cracked beneath the force of her power, and the demons were thrown back. By a wave that burned with more than wrath, it burned with release. She stepped down from her throne, her long gown flowing like rivers of night. Her cheeks glowed faintly, and her lips trembled with the faintest curve of a smile. Not the cruel smile of a ruler, but the fragile smile of someone awakening from a long slumber. She looked at Kale, and her voice, though still powerful, carried softness. "I have granted countless wishes, and none have touched me like yours. You ask nothing for yourself, only for others, only for me. And for the first time in eternity, I do not know if I am the one granting or if I am the one receiving." The generals shrieked in defiance, rallying their strength to strike down the human. But the goddess turned her gaze upon them, and her voice thundered, "Leave now. You no longer hold power in this court, for I am not your chain and I am not your prison, I am free." The demons staggered in horror, their rebellion cut down not by violence but by truth. They had followed her because she was unbreakable, yet now she had broken the chains even within herself. and that was a power greater than any they had known. They fled into the shadows, their fury echoing as they vanished into the depths of the underworld. Silence followed. Only Kale and the goddess remained in the vast throne room. The fires flickered gently, and the weight of ages seemed to lift from the air. She stepped closer, until she stood before him, her eyes glowing not with wrath, but with something she had forgotten long ago. She whispered, "You have undone me, mortal. Yet in undoing me, you have given me something no one ever has. You have given me a choice." She reached out her hand, and for the first time in her eternal reign, it was not a hand of command, but a hand of offering. Kale looked into her eyes and saw not the goddess of fear, but a woman who had carried the burden of eternity, and at last had set it down. He took her hand without hesitation, and in that touch the underworld shifted forever. The throne behind her cracked and crumbled as if the stone itself acknowledged the end of her dominion. The fires dimmed yet glowed with warmth rather than cruelty. The cries of the freed rose higher now, not in fear but in triumph. The goddess turned back one final time, to see the throne dissolve into dust. She smiled again, soft and unguarded, a smile that belonged not to a deity, but to someone who had finally remembered what it meant to feel. She whispered to Kale, "You asked for my smile, and now you have it, but you have also given me my soul back. For that I will never forget you." Together they walked from the throne room toward the cries of the freed, and the shadows of the underworld parted before them. The demons who remained watched in silence, unable to strike, unable to defy, for they too felt the weight of change. Kale had stood against an empire, and his last wish had not only freed the enslaved, but freed the heart of the very goddess who ruled them. And so the story of one mortal soldier and the demon goddess became legend. A tale not of conquest or greed, but of truth, courage, and the power of words to break even the chains of eternity. The underworld shook as though every stone and shadow knew the moment had arrived. The goddess stood, tall, her crimson eyes locked upon Kale, while her generals trembled in rage and fear. The freed souls outside still cried with voices of hope, and inside the throne room, silence spread heavy and unyielding. Kale did not kneel. He did not falter, his body broken from battles past, yet his spirit blazing with unshakable resolve. He had spoken 2 wishes that turned the underworld upside down, and now only one remained. His final wish. The generals demanded blood. They raised their weapons and hissed that the human must be destroyed before his poison consumed their queen. Their leader stepped forward, his wings unfurled, his spear glowing like molten iron. He declared that the goddess had grown weak, and that her reign would fall if she allowed this mortal another word. But before he could strike, the goddess raised her hand, and her aura filled the chamber, forcing every demon to bow or be crushed. Her voice rang like thunder, yet it carried a softness that had not been heard in centuries. "I will hear him." She turned her gaze to Kale. "Speak your final wish." Kyle took a breath and lifted his head. His eyes met hers, and in them she saw no fear, no hunger for glory, only the steady light of truth. His voice carried across the hall, calm and strong. "I wish for you to be free, not as a goddess bound to a throne of fear, not as a ruler chained by endless power. I wish for you to live as you choose, as yourself." The chamber froze, the fires dimmed to embers. The demons gasped as though the very air had betrayed them. Never had anyone spoken such words, never had anyone dared to ask for the freedom of the one who ruled with chains. For centuries she had believed herself untouchable, yet now she realized that her throne was not strength, but a prison carved from conquest. Her lips parted, but no words came. Her hands trembled as the truth struck deeper than any blade. The generals screamed their fury. They called her traitor. They vowed to rise against her. They raised their weapons to strike her down and to tear the human apart. But before they could move, her aura erupted brighter than any star. The flames in the braziers exploded, the marble cracked, and the palace shook with her power. The demons were thrown to their knees and their voices silenced. She stood tall, and for the first time her voice carried not wrath but release. "I am not your prison. I am not your chain. I am free." The throne behind her split down the center and crumbled into dust. The chains that bound the underworld shattered again, not of metal but of spirit. The freed souls outside wept with joy, their voices rising into the dark sky. The demons staggered their rebellion, broken by the truth. They could not follow a queen who no longer ruled by fear, and yet they could not defy her strength either. Some fled into the shadows, others bowed their heads in silence, but none could undo what had been spoken. The goddess stepped down from the ruins of her throne and stood before Kale. Her cheeks glowed faintly, her lips curved into a smile soft and unguarded, a smile not of command but of life. She whispered, "You have undone me, mortal, yet you have given me more than I ever imagined. You have given me choice. You have given me my soul." Kale took her hand and, together they walked through the silent hall as the fires glowed warm rather than cruel. The underworld bent before them, not with fear but with awe. Outside, the cries of the freed filled the air, and the shadows parted as if the realm itself acknowledged the change. The goddess walked not as a ruler but as one who had finally remembered what it meant to live, and beside her walked the human who had dared to speak truth where others begged for power. His 3 wishes had changed everything, but more than that, his courage had awakened the heart of eternity. And so the story of Kale and the demon goddess was carried across realms, a tale not of conquest, but of freedom, not of chains, but of choice. A mortal who stood unarmed before the throne of the underworld and with words alone reshaped destiny, the end.